Nestled amidst towering peaks, shrouded in mist, lies the village of Hollow Creek. Beneath its idyllic facade, a darkness festered, painting the cobblestone streets with dread. The villagers, hardened by harsh winters, bore a stoicism that ran deep, their eyes reflecting a perpetual fear. Every full moon brought a chilling reminder of the beast that lurked in the darkness. Once a month, the moon cast an eerie crimson glow upon the village, signaling the return of terror. The air crackled with unseen energy, a palpable tension that sent shivers down spines. A blood-curdling scream would pierce the night, followed by frantic barking and running footsteps. The beast was upon them, its hunger driving it to unleash fury upon the village. A guttural howl tore through the stillness, freezing the marrow in their bones. The beast moved like a phantom, a blur of shadow and rage, striking with brutal efficiency. Doors were ripped from hinges, windows shattered, and the night was punctuated by terrified cries. The villagers, paralyzed by fear, huddled in their homes, listening to the sounds of carnage. As dawn broke, the true extent of the horror revealed itself. The cobblestone streets were deserted, stained crimson with the blood of the fallen. The villagers emerged, their faces pale and drawn, moving like ghosts in the unnatural silence. The weight of their loss hung heavy in the air, a palpable grief that threatened to suffocate them. Beneath the surface of grief, a new emotion began to stir, rage. In the dimly lit tavern, a plan took shape, fueled by grief, anger, and determination. The villagers, hardened by hardship, spoke of vengeance, their voices echoing with resolve. They would stand together, face their tormentor, and reclaim their right to live without fear. Under the cloak of night, the village's bravest souls gathered in the shadow of the old church. Farmers, blacksmiths, and shopkeepers, their eyes burned with resolve, checked their weapons. One by one, they swore an oath to stand together, fight with courage, and not rest until the beast lay dead. The flickering light glinted off their silver-coated weapons, a sliver of hope against the creature. The plan was simple: use themselves as bait, transforming the village into a hunting ground. The women and children were sent to the old church, its thick stone walls offering sanctuary. The men fanned out through the village, their boots echoing on the cobblestones, eyes scanning for the beast. Lanterns cast long dancing shadows, transforming the clearing into a macabre stage. As the night deepened, the hunters ventured beyond the village walls into the dense forest. The forest floor, a tapestry of fallen leaves and damp earth, was thick with the scent of pine needles. The trail they followed was marked by the mangled carcass of a deer, a chilling testament to the beast's passing. Despite their fear, they pressed onward, driven by duty, vengeance, and a primal need to confront the darkness. An eternity seemed to pass as the hunters, concealed amongst the trees, waited for the beast's return. The forest held its breath, the anticipation almost unbearable, a heavy weight pressing down on their chests. A twig snapped in the distance, sending a jolt of adrenaline through the hunters' veins. The waiting was a torture, a slow, agonizing burn that tested their resolve and courage. A low growl, barely audible at first, then rising in volume, shattered the silence. The scent hit them next, a pungent mix of wet fur, blood, and something else, something primal and terrifying that sent a shiver down their spines. The unmistakable scent of fear. The beast was close, and it could smell their terror. The growl became a guttural snarl as the creature emerged from the trees and into the pool of light cast by the flickering lanterns. The villagers gasped, their blood turning to ice. This was no ordinary wolf. It was larger, more powerful, its eyes burning with a malevolent intelligence. Its fur, matted with blood and dirt, seemed to absorb the moonlight, making it appear as a void, a shadow given form. A collective gasp escaped the lips of the hunters, their fingers tightening around their makeshift weapons. The moment of truth had arrived, the culmination of their fear, their rage, their desperate hope for survival. The creature, sensing their presence, threw back its head and let loose a blood-curdling howl that echoed through the trees. A challenge, a declaration of war. Their carefully crafted plan, their whispered prayers, their silver-coated weapons, all seemed woefully inadequate in the face of this primal terror. Yet they were bound by their oath, by their love for their families, by their desperate need to survive this night. Fear warred with resolve in their eyes as they steeled themselves for the confrontation that would decide the fate of their village, their lives, their very souls. The werewolf lunged. A whirlwind of fur and fangs, it crashed into the hunters' ranks, scattering them like leaves before a storm. The clearing, moments ago a beacon of hope in the heart of the darkness, erupted into chaos. The beast, its senses heightened by the scent of blood and fear, moved with a speed and ferocity that defied comprehension. Men screamed, their voices raw with terror as the creature tore through their ranks. The air filled with the sickening crunch of bone, the wet, tearing sound of flesh being ripped apart. Lanterns toppled, their flames extinguished, plunging the clearing into a darkness broken only by the flashes of moonlight on gnashing teeth and the blood-red glow in the beast's eyes. The hunters, their carefully planned formations shattered, fought back with the desperation of men facing their own mortality. Axes swung, their silvered blades glinting in the darkness, connecting with the beast's thick hide. Gunfire erupted, the roar of the muskets deafening in the confined space, but the bullets seemed to have little effect, swallowed by the creature's unnatural fury. Each fallen comrade fueled their rage, their grief, but also their fear. They had underestimated the beast's speed, its raw power. The legends whispered around hearthfires for generations hadn't prepared them for this, for the sheer primal terror that now stalked them through the darkness. The clearing became a whirlwind of claws, fangs, and silvered steel. The hunters, their initial terror giving way to a grim determination, rallied, forming a loose circle around the beast, using their superior numbers to their advantage. They had one chance, one slim hope of victory, the ancient law that spoke of silver's power to wound the beast. Every thrust of a pitchfork, every swing of an axe, every bullet fired was aimed at the creature's heart, hoping to find a weakness in its monstrous hide. But the werewolf fought like a demon possessed, its movements a blur of fangs and claws, its roars echoing through the trees, a symphony of rage and pain. One hunter, his face pale but resolute, managed to land a blow, his silver-coated axe biting deep into the beast's shoulder. The creature roared in pain, its blood, black as ink in the moonlight, splattering onto the fallen leaves. The scent of it, metallic and cloying, filled the air, fueling both the beast's rage and the hunter's desperate hope. They pressed their attack, their movements becoming more frantic, fueled by adrenaline and fear. But the beast was strong, its wounds already beginning to close, its rage growing with every passing moment. The hunters, their numbers dwindling, their strength failing, knew that time was running out. The clearing, once a place of beauty and peace, was now a charnel house. The sweet smell of pine and damp earth was overpowered by the stench of blood and viscera. The hunters, their faces streaked with sweat and blood, their clothes torn, fought with the desperation of men who knew they were dancing with death. The werewolf, its fur now a tapestry of wounds, moved with a terrifying grace, its attacks becoming more precise, more deadly. It seemed to revel in their fear, its eyes gleaming with a malevolent intelligence, as it stalked amongst them, playing a deadly game of cat and mouse. One by one the hunters fell, their bodies broken and bloodied, their screams swallowed by the night. Each death chipped away at the remaining men's resolve, the weight of their sacrifice heavy on their hearts. Yet they continued to fight, driven by a primal instinct for survival, by the memory of loved ones waiting for them back in the village. The fight became a blur of motion and sound, the clang of steel against fangs, the sickening thud of bodies hitting the ground, the roar of the beast echoing through the trees. The air grew thick with the coppery tang of blood, the stench of death clinging to the back of their throats. The clearing fell silent, the silence of exhaustion, of defeat. Only one hunter remained standing, his body battered, his weapon broken, his face a mask of blood and grime. He stood between the beast and the village, a lone sentinel against the encroaching darkness. The werewolf, its chest heaving, its eyes burning with a cold fire, circled him slowly, savoring its victory. It let out a low growl, a sound that spoke of both amusement and anticipation, a predator toying with its prey. The hunter met the creature's gaze, no longer with fear, but with a strange sense of acceptance. He had done his duty, fought with every ounce of strength he possessed. He had failed to protect his comrades, but he would not fail his village. He would be the last line of defense, a sacrifice to buy them time, to give them a fighting chance. He closed his eyes, drawing in a deep breath, the metallic tang of blood filling his lungs. He thought of his wife, her gentle smile, the warmth of her hand in his. He thought of his children, their laughter echoing through the halls of their small home. And he found peace, a strange serenity in the face of certain death. A blood-curdling scream tore through the night, a scream of both pain and rage. The hunter opened his eyes, his vision blurring, and saw the beast standing over him, its jaws clamped around his throat. But something was wrong. The creature wasn't savoring its kill. It was thrashing, convulsing, its body racked with tremors, its eyes wide with a mixture of pain and confusion. The hunter, his lifeblood draining away, his vision fading, reached out a trembling hand. His fingers brushed against something cold, metallic, embedded deep in the beast's chest. The silver locket, a gift from his wife, the one he always wore beneath his shirt. It had come loose during the fight, had found its way into the heart of the beast, fulfilling the ancient prophecy. With a final shuddering gasp, the werewolf collapsed, its body transforming, the monstrous form melting away to reveal the broken and bloodied body of a man. The hunter stared in disbelief, his last breath escaping his lips in a gasp of horror and understanding. The beast, the monster that had terrorized their village, wasn't some creature of the night. It was one of their own. As darkness claimed him, the hunter was left with a chilling realization, one that would forever haunt the village of Hollow Creek. The beast was dead, but it was not alone. Silence descended upon the clearing, heavy and thick like a shroud. The first rays of dawn illuminated the scene of carnage, painting the blood-soaked leaves a grotesque shade of crimson. The air, heavy with the stench of death, hung thick and oppressive. The surviving villagers emerged, their faces etched with grief and relief. The sight that greeted them sent a collective gasp of horror through their ranks. The ground was littered with the bodies of their loved ones. And in the center lay the beast, now a broken and bloodied man. They stared in disbelief, struggling to reconcile the monster with the familiar face of their friend. The silence was shattered by a woman's scream, raw and primal. It echoed the collective horror in their hearts. The beast wasn't a creature of myth and legend. It was one of their own, hidden in plain sight. The revelation of the werewolf's true identity sent shockwaves through the grief-stricken village. The sense of relief at having vanquished the beast was quickly replaced by a chilling wave of paranoia and distrust. If the monster had walked among them, disguised in the familiar skin of a friend, who was to say there weren't others? The once unbreakable bonds of community, forged in hardship and shared history, began to fray. Suspicion clouded their eyes, poisoned their hearts. Every shared glance, every whispered conversation carried the weight of doubt and accusation. The very foundations upon which their lives had been built seemed to crumble, replaced by a quicksand of fear and uncertainty. The whispers started subtly, like the rustling of leaves in a gentle breeze. Speculation about the werewolf's identity, about who else might be harboring the beast within, spread like wildfire through the narrow lanes and crowded taverns. Old grudges resurfaced, fueled by fear and suspicion. Innocent gestures were misinterpreted, harmless words twisted into threats. The elders, their faces etched with the wisdom of experience, tried to quell the rising tide of paranoia, to remind them of the values that had always bound them together: trust, community, compassion. But their words fell on deaf ears. The fear, once focused on an external threat, had turned inward, transforming friends into potential enemies, neighbors into suspected monsters. Driven by a desperate need for answers, the villagers turned to the past. They sought answers in dusty tomes and ancient scrolls, hoping to find some clue for the curse that had befallen them. The village elder, his face etched with centuries, became their guide, tracing the faded ink of ancient texts. He spoke of a pact made with an ancient evil, a curse haunting their bloodline ever since. The villagers listened, their hearts heavy with dread, realizing the horrifying truth within their own bloodlines. As the elder's words settled, a chilling realization dawned upon the villagers. The curse wasn't broken. The beast was gone, but its blood still flowed through their veins. The curse could resurface, a shadow over their future. Fear became a constant companion. Villagers now looked at one another with suspicion. Fear drove a wedge between them. Families were torn apart by suspicion. The village became a breeding ground for paranoia. The cycle of violence continued. The curse, sealed in blood, lived on. Hollow Creek became a prison of its own making. The dawn broke over Hollow Creek, painting the snow-capped peaks in hues of rose and gold, but the village below remained shrouded in a chilling gloom. The hunt was over, the beast vanquished, but the victory felt hollow. The villagers emerged from their homes, their faces etched with a mixture of grief and relief, their movements hesitant, as if unsure of the ground beneath their feet. The familiar streets now seemed alien, tainted by the horrors they had witnessed. The physical wounds would heal, the scars fading with time, but the psychological wounds, the invisible marks etched deep within their psyche, would continue to fester. Their dreams invaded by images of blood and fur, their sleep disturbed by the phantom echoes of the beast's roar. Their world, once so clearly defined, had been irrevocably shattered. The line between man and monster had blurred, leaving them to grapple with the unsettling possibility that the darkness they had confronted resided not in some external force, but within themselves. The knowledge of the curse, the ancient pact that bound their bloodline to the beast, settled upon the village like a shroud. The elders' words, spoken in hushed tones amidst the flickering shadows of the ancient church, echoed in their minds, a constant reminder of the darkness that resided within their midst. The weight of their history, of the sins of their fathers, pressed down on them, suffocating them with its insidious dread. The hunt had brought them a measure of closure, but it had also unearthed a terrifying truth. The curse was not easily broken. The beast they had slain was gone, but the taint, the potential for its return, lingered in the blood that flowed through their veins. They were bound to it, tethered to the darkness by an invisible thread that stretched back through generations. Every full moon, as the silver orb climbed high in the night sky, casting its eerie glow upon the village, the fear would resurface, a primal dread that tightened its grip on their hearts. They would remember the screams, the scent of blood, the horrifying realization that the monster they had faced wore a familiar face. They were no longer a community, but a collection of individuals bound together by a shared secret, a terrible knowledge that poisoned their interactions, their eyes betraying their suspicion, their smiles masking their fear. The curse had not only claimed the lives of their loved ones, but it had also stolen their peace of mind, their ability to trust, their faith in each other. Life went on in Hollow Creek as it always had, but it was a pale imitation of its former self. The villagers continued their lives, but the shadow of the curse lingered, a constant presence. Joy had drained away, replaced by quiet resignation. They learned to live with fear, navigating the world with wary eyes. Traditions once comforting now seemed hollow, tinged with desperate hope. The full moon, once a symbol of celebration, now a chilling reminder of their vulnerability. The air crackled with unseen energy, sending shivers down their spines. Even in daylight, they felt watched, the beast lurking beyond perception. Hollow Creek, isolated by its dark secret, had become an island unto itself. Time seemed to stand still, their lives bound to the lunar cycle, fate hanging in the balance. The grand old mansion stood on a windswept bluff, a monument to forgotten glory. Ivy, like grasping claws, clung to the walls, reaching towards the clouded sky. This was Blackwood Manor, a relic of a bygone era, whispering tales of grandeur and despair. Local legend whispered of a wealthy family driven to madness within its walls, their opulent lives crumbling into ruin. The mansion had stood empty for decades, shunned by locals who spoke of cold spots, strange noises, and unsettling apparitions. Sarah, a young and ambitious real estate agent, pulled up to the wrought iron gates of Blackwood Manor. Her bright red car seemed an anomaly against the backdrop of the decaying mansion. This was her latest challenge, a property even the most seasoned realtors wouldn't touch. The owner, a distant relative of the original family, was desperate to unload the property. He offered Sarah a hefty commission, a tempting offer that she, perhaps foolishly, couldn't refuse. The sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the overgrown lawns. Sarah, armed with a flashlight and a growing sense of unease, stepped inside the mansion. The heavy oak door groaned shut behind her, the sound echoing through the cavernous hall like a mournful sigh. The air was stale and cold, thick with the scent of decay and something else she couldn't quite place. As darkness fell, so did the silence, broken only by the creaking of the old house and the pounding of Sarah's own heart. Sarah stood at the foot of the grand staircase, its once polished mahogany now dull and scratched. She raised her flashlight, its beam cutting through the gloom, revealing a massive portrait of a man with piercing blue eyes that seemed to follow her every move. This was Elias Blackwood, the original owner of the mansion, the man whose dark legend clung to the place like a shroud. She turned away from the unsettling gaze and began to climb the stairs, her footsteps echoing in the oppressive silence. Each step creaked in protest, as if the old house itself resented her intrusion. The upper level of the mansion was a labyrinth of shadowy corridors and cavernous rooms, each one shrouded in a thick layer of dust and neglect. Sarah moved from room to room, her flashlight beam dancing across faded wallpaper, threadbare carpets and furniture draped in white sheets that resembled ghostly apparitions. In the master bedroom, she found a dusty gramophone sitting on a small table beside a window overlooking the grounds. Curiously, she brushed the dust from its surface, revealing the engraved inscription, "To my dearest Amelia, may our love always fill these rooms with music." As she turned to leave, she swore she heard a faint melody, a mournful waltz, echoing through the empty room. Deeper into the mansion's depths, Sarah stumbled upon a room that chilled her to the bone. It was a child's nursery, its once cheerful wallpaper now faded and peeling, revealing the bare bones of the structure beneath. A rocking horse stood frozen mid-stride in the center of the room, its chipped paint and dusty surface whispering of long-forgotten laughter. On the far wall she noticed a dollhouse, its elaborate facade covered in a thick layer of dust. Its tiny windows, like the eyes of a watchful child, seemed to follow her every move. A child's laughter, high-pitched and filled with an unsettling glee, echoed through the silence, sending a shiver down her spine. She spun around, searching for the source of the sound, but the room was empty. This room, more than any other, felt tainted, imbued with a sorrow that clung to the walls like cobwebs. Leaving the nursery behind, Sarah found herself drawn to the dining room. It was a grand space with a long mahogany table that could easily seat 20 guests. An elaborate chandelier hung above the table, its crystals dulled with time, casting fragmented reflections on the polished surface. She imagined the room as it might have been, filled with the murmur of conversation, the clinking of silverware, the warm glow of candlelight. But the vision was shattered by the oppressive atmosphere that permeated the house, a suffocating weight that seemed to press down on her chest. The table was set for a formal dinner. Fine china plates adorned with a delicate floral pattern sat atop linen placemats, and silverware gleamed under the dim light. But there was only one place setting, positioned at the head of the table facing the empty room. A cold breeze swept through the dining room, extinguishing the single flickering candle Sarah had lit upon entering. Darkness descended, heavy and absolute, amplifying the silence that pressed in on her. She fumbled for her flashlight, its beam a meager defense against the shadows that seemed to writhe and coalesce in the darkness. Then she saw him. A figure, tall and gaunt, standing at the head of the table, the single place setting a stark tableau before him. He did not move, did not seem to breathe, yet his presence filled the room, a suffocating weight that stole the air from her lungs. Fear, primal and instinctive, surged through her, urging her to flee, to escape the suffocating presence that held her captive. The figure remained motionless, a spectre at the feast. Yet Sarah felt the weight of his gaze upon her, a tangible sensation that sent chills crawling down her spine. Whispers, soft and indistinct, slithered through the darkness, weaving around her like icy fingers. They spoke of betrayal, of madness, of a rage that echoed through the ages. A name, repeated over and over, cut through the whispers, sharp and clear. Amelia. His Amelia. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, swirling around her like a vortex of despair. Sarah pressed her hands to her ears, desperate to block out the sounds that clawed at her sanity. As suddenly as they began, the whispers ceased, leaving behind a silence that throbbed in Sarah's ears. The figure at the head of the table flickered, its edges blurring, then solidifying once more. And then he spoke. His voice, a low rumble that seemed to emanate from the very walls of the mansion, sent shivers down her spine. "She betrayed me," he rasped, his voice filled with an ancient sorrow that chilled Sarah to her core. "My Amelia. She broke my heart, and I could not allow it." The air shimmered beside him, and another figure began to materialize, ethereal and luminescent against the oppressive darkness. It was a woman dressed in a flowing white gown, her long dark hair cascading down her back. "Elias," the woman whispered, her voice a mournful sigh that seemed to echo through the ages. "Forgive me." Her words hung in the air, heavy with regret, but the man only shook his head, his expression one of unwavering sorrow. He turned his gaze upon Sarah, his eyes, once filled with grief, now burning with a cold, calculating light. "You are like her," he said, his voice devoid of emotion, a hollow whisper that seemed to seep into Sarah's very being. "Do you see yourself in her?" he pressed, his voice growing stronger, more insistent. "Do you see the darkness that lurks beneath the surface, the ambition that consumes you?" Taking a hesitant step towards the mirror, Sarah felt a chill run down her spine as she met her own gaze. But it wasn't just her reflection staring back at her. Superimposed over her own features, she saw the face of Amelia, her eyes filled with a haunting sadness that sent shivers down Sarah's spine. The air around her crackled with energy, and the room seemed to shift and distort, the boundaries between the past and present blurring. The whispers started again, this time louder, more insistent, swirling around her, threatening to pull her under. She stumbled back, away from the mirror, away from the ghostly apparitions that seemed to close in on her. Panic surged through her, a wave of terror that threatened to overwhelm her. She had to escape, to break free from the nightmare that was unfolding around her. Turning, she fled the dining room, her footsteps echoing through the silent mansion. She burst through a door at the end of a long hallway, slamming it shut behind her, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the stillness. The locked room was plunged in an almost suffocating darkness, Sarah's panicked breaths the only sound. Her hand trembled as she fumbled for her flashlight, the beam slicing through the oppressive shadows to reveal a dusty, forgotten space. The air hung heavy, thick with the scent of mildew and decay, a tangible reminder of the passage of time and the weight of forgotten memories. The room was sparsely furnished, its only occupants a rusted bed frame, a single wooden chair, and a small chipped vanity table. A single cobweb-draped window offered a glimpse of the moonlit grounds outside, the twisted branches of ancient trees reaching towards the glass like skeletal fingers. But it was the walls that held Sarah's gaze, their once vibrant wallpaper now faded and peeling, revealing a chilling glimpse into the past. The room seemed to press in on Sarah, the weight of its history suffocating. She ran a hand along the cold, damp wall, her fingers tracing the outline of a child's drawing. A simple house with a crooked chimney, a smiling sun beaming down from the corner of the page. But beneath the surface of the childish image, she sensed a darkness, a lurking terror that seeped from the very walls themselves. It was then that she noticed the name scrawled over and over again amidst the drawings and frantic scribbles. Amelia, the walls whispered, the name a haunting refrain that echoed through the silence of the abandoned room. It was the same name she had heard whispered in the dining room, the same name etched on the dusty gramophone upstairs. The realization struck Sarah like a physical blow. This was Amelia's room, the place where she had sought refuge from the darkness that consumed Blackwood Manor. But there was more to it than that, a deeper connection that sent shivers down Sarah's spine. She was experiencing Amelia's memories, her terror, her desperate attempts to escape the clutches of a madman. Images flashed through Sarah's mind, fragmented and disjointed, yet undeniably vivid. She saw a young Amelia, her laughter echoing through the halls of the mansion, her eyes sparkling with life and love. She saw Elias, his gaze fixed upon her with a possessiveness that bordered on obsession. He showered her with gifts, adorned her with jewels, but his love was a suffocating thing, a gilded cage that threatened to consume her. Sarah felt Amelia's growing unease, her desperate attempts to break free from Elias's control. She saw stolen moments with a young artist, his touch gentle, his eyes reflecting a love that was both passionate and forbidden. But their happiness was short-lived, their secret affair discovered by a jealous and vengeful Elias. The air grew colder, the shadows in the room deepening as Sarah witnessed the unraveling of Amelia's world. She felt the sting of betrayal, the crushing weight of despair as Elias, consumed by jealousy and rage, tore Amelia away from her love, locking her away in this very room, her laughter replaced by the sobs of a broken heart. Sarah stumbled back from the wall, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a scream. The air was thick with the stench of blood, the metallic tang stinging her nostrils. The room seemed to pulsate around her, the walls closing in, the shadows taking on monstrous shapes. She was no longer just a witness to the past. She was living it, breathing it, drowning in the suffocating depths of Amelia's terror. And then she saw him, Elias, his face contorted in a mask of rage, his hands stained crimson. He stood over the lifeless body of the young artist, his eyes burning with a cold, calculating madness. Sarah watched in horror as he turned his gaze upon Amelia, his voice a chilling whisper that seemed to claw at her sanity. "You will never leave me," he hissed, his words dripping with venom. "You are mine, Amelia, forever." Sarah felt a primal fear course through her, a terror that transcended time and reason. She understood now the true depths of Elias's madness, the possessive love that had driven him to murder. The room spun, the images blurring into a kaleidoscope of horror. Sarah sank to the floor, her back against the cold, damp wall, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She was trapped, not just within the confines of the locked room, but within the prison of Elias's creation, forced to relive the horrors he had inflicted upon Amelia. As the initial shock subsided, a new emotion welled up within Sarah: anger, a burning rage at the injustice of it all, at the senseless cruelty that had poisoned Blackwood Manor and claimed the lives of its inhabitants. She would not allow Elias to win, to keep her prisoner in his web of madness. Sarah pushed herself to her feet, her gaze sweeping the room, searching for a way out, for a glimmer of hope in the suffocating darkness. She had to escape, not just for herself, but for Amelia, for the tortured soul trapped within these walls. She had to break the cycle of madness, to lay the ghosts of Blackwood Manor to rest. Sarah's eyes scanned the room, desperate for an escape. The single window, high and narrow, offered no escape. The rusted bars, a cruel mockery of her predicament, seemed to mock her with their impenetrability. The door remained firmly locked, the heavy wood a barrier between her and the outside world. Her gaze fell upon the vanity table, its surface covered in a thick layer of dust. She approached cautiously, her hand hovering over a tarnished silver hairbrush and a chipped hand mirror. As her fingers brushed against the cold glass, a jolt of energy surged through her, and a vision flashed before her eyes. It was Amelia, her face etched with desperation, her movements frantic as she pried loose a floorboard near the vanity. She hid something beneath the floorboard, something small and silver, then carefully replaced the wood, her movements swift and precise. The vision faded, leaving Sarah staring at the floorboard, her heart pounding in her chest. Could it be? Had Amelia left a clue, a way to escape the clutches of Blackwood Manor? She dropped to her knees, her fingers tracing the edges of the floorboard. It was loose, just as Amelia had shown her. With a grunt of effort, she pried it free, revealing a tarnished silver key lying in the dust. Clutching the key in her hand, Sarah raced back to the door, her heart pounding with a mixture of hope and trepidation. The key slid into the lock with a satisfying click, and the heavy door swung open, revealing the dimly lit hallway beyond. She had escaped the locked room, but she knew her ordeal was far from over. The whispers followed her, swirling around her like angry spirits, urging her towards her destiny. She ascended the grand staircase, each step heavy with dread, her footsteps echoing in the oppressive silence. The air grew colder as she approached the grand ballroom, the faint strains of a mournful waltz drawing her in. The ballroom doors stood open, revealing a scene both beautiful and terrifying. The room was dimly lit by flickering wall sconces, their light dancing across the dusty surfaces and casting long, eerie shadows. In the center of the room, bathed in an ethereal glow, Elias and Amelia waltzed silently, their movements fluid and graceful, yet utterly devoid of joy. Sarah watched, transfixed, as Elias spun Amelia, his grip on her tight, possessive. Their faces were pale, their expressions etched with a sorrow that transcended death. They were prisoners of their past, forever bound together in a dance of despair. Elias's gaze snapped towards Sarah, his eyes burning with a cold fire. The music stopped abruptly, the silence deafening in its wake. Amelia turned, her eyes widening in recognition, her lips parting as if to speak, but no sound emerged. "You cannot escape me," Elias hissed, his voice echoing through the vast ballroom. "This house is bound to me, and you are now a part of its story." He moved towards Sarah, his steps slow and deliberate, his spectral form shimmering in the flickering light. "Amelia is mine," he snarled, his voice rising in anger, "and you will not take her from me." He lunged at Sarah, his spectral hand reaching for her throat, his touch sending a jolt of icy fear through her veins. Sarah stumbled back, her hand instinctively reaching for the silver key clutched tightly in her fist. The key pulsed with a warm energy, a beacon of hope in the suffocating darkness. She knew in that moment that this was not just her fight, but Amelia's as well. Sarah thrust the silver key towards Elias, her hand trembling but her resolve unwavering. "Amelia chooses freedom!" she cried. The key flared with a blinding white light, the air crackling with energy. Elias recoiled, his spectral form flickering violently. A guttural roar shook Blackwood Manor. Amelia, bathed in ethereal light, reached out to Sarah. Then the light faded, leaving a profound silence. Sarah stood, her breath catching. The room was empty, the only sound the creaking of the old house. Elias and Amelia were gone, their tortured souls finally laid to rest. The air felt lighter, a faint scent of lilac lingering, a bittersweet reminder of the love and tragedy within these walls. Sarah stood frozen in the ballroom, the silver key cold in her hand, the silence pressed in, broken only by her frantic heartbeat. The horrors she witnessed felt seared into her being. She stumbled out, footsteps echoing through the dark mansion. The grand foyer now seemed almost welcoming. She fumbled with the lock, fingers clumsy with fear. Stepping into the cool night air, dawn began to break. Blackwood Manor stood silently, its ghosts at peace. Sarah took a deep breath, the crisp air filling her lungs. She had escaped, but would never be the same. The experience left an indelible mark on her soul. She cast one last glance at Blackwood Manor, a mixture of relief and unease. Some doors, she realized, are better left unopened. In the desolate heart of nowhere there stood a mansion. This wasn't just any dwelling, this was a Gothic fortress of secrets. Towering spires scratched at the moon. Each window was an empty eye staring out blankly into the night. This mansion was a testament to time and decay. The mansion had stood for centuries. Its walls had absorbed countless souls. Generations had come and gone. It was a monolith of darkness. The air crackled with unseen energy. The veil between worlds felt thin. The scent of decay hung heavy. This was not a place for the faint of heart. This was a place where nightmares were born. This was a place where a vampire made his home. Once a decade, under the eerie glow of a blood moon, invitations were issued. Crafted from the finest parchment, sealed with crimson wax, they whispered promises of unimaginable wealth and power. Each invitation was personalized, tailored to exploit the deepest desires of the recipient. For some, it was the promise of untold riches. For others, the allure of forbidden knowledge. The vampire knew how to exploit it, weaving a tapestry of temptation. The journey to the mansion was always fraught with peril. Storms would gather with unnatural speed, as if summoned by an unseen force. Yet driven by their desires, the guests would press on. Those who dared to refuse the invitation met with unfortunate ends. For him, the masquerade ball was not merely a gathering, it was a hunt, and he was the ultimate predator. They came from far and wide, lured by the vampire's promises. Wealthy socialites, ambitious politicians, and the desperate arrived with dark secrets. Strangers brought together by fate and the vampire's machinations. They were about to become players in a macabre game of life and death. Laughter echoed through the halls, hollow and mirthless. Oblivious to danger, they were like lambs to the slaughter. The mansion's interior was a testament to a bygone era, a labyrinth of winding corridors and cavernous chambers. The guests, upon entering the grand hall, gasped. The sheer scale of the room was breathtaking, the ceiling disappearing into shadows high above. Crystal chandeliers cast flickering light upon the scene below. The air hummed with a strange energy, a mixture of anticipation and unease. Music drifted from an unseen orchestra, a haunting melody. The guests were drawn deeper into the heart of the mansion. The walls were adorned with portraits of men and women from across the ages. Their eyes seemed to follow the guests as they moved through the room. Each face whispered of secrets best left buried. The guests, lost in a sea of silk, velvet, and glittering jewels, were unaware of the predator circling above. The vampire had woven a spell of beauty and opulence, masking the horrors that awaited. A hush fell over the grand hall as a figure emerged from the shadows at the top of the grand staircase. The vampire, tall and imposing, moved with a grace that belied his true nature. His eyes, two smoldering embers, scanned the crowd, drinking in the fear and desire that hung heavy in the air. He was a masterpiece of deception, his appearance a carefully crafted illusion designed to disarm and beguile. His features, though undeniably ancient, held a timeless appeal. His voice, a low, resonant purr, seemed to weave its way into the minds of his guests, planting seeds of doubt and desire. "Welcome, my friends," the vampire greeted, his words echoing through the silent hall, "to my humble abode. Tonight we celebrate life in all its intoxicating glory." His lips curved into a smile that did not reach his eyes. His words, laced with a subtle undercurrent of menace, hung in the air. The guests, captivated by his presence, responded with nervous laughter and polite applause. They clung to his every word, their own desires blinding them to the truth. The masquerade had begun. The music swelled, its tempo quickening, becoming more insistent. Couples paired off, their masked faces a blur of movement beneath the shimmering chandeliers. The vampire, choosing a beautiful young woman with eyes that spoke of both ambition and vulnerability, led her onto the dance floor. The dance floor became a swirling vortex of color and motion. Guests, caught up in the frenzy, lost themselves in the rhythm. They laughed, they drank, they pretended for just a moment that they were not prisoners in a gilded cage. The vampire, his grip on his dance partner tightening ever so slightly, leaned in close, his lips brushing against her ear. "You intrigue me," he whispered, his voice a seductive murmur. "Tell me, what is it you desire most in this world?" The woman, her senses overwhelmed by his proximity, stammered a response. The vampire, sensing her vulnerability, smiled, a slow, predatory stretching of his lips that sent shivers down her spine. The air crackled with a dark energy, the room seeming to close in around them. The other guests, oblivious to the exchange, continued their revelry, unaware of the predator moving among them. As the night wore on, a sense of unease began to creep through the grand hall, a discordant note in the symphony of revelry. Whispers of strange occurrences, of fleeting shadows and disembodied voices spread like wildfire among the guests. A sense of claustrophobia permeated the air, the once grand hall now feeling oppressively small. The portraits that lined the wall seemed to loom closer, their painted eyes following the guests' every move with unsettling intensity. One guest, a nervous young man, swore he saw a figure lurking in the shadows behind a tapestry. Another, a woman prone to fainting spells, claimed to have felt a cold hand brush against her neck. The vampire, observing the growing unease with a mixture of amusement and anticipation, allowed a predatory smile to spread across his lips. His guests, like flies caught in a spiderweb, were beginning to realize the true nature of their predicament. The night was young, and the feast was about to begin. The gaiety of the masquerade began to fray at the edges. A disquieting tension seeped into the revelry, like blood staining a pristine white gown. Guests, emboldened by wine and lulled into a false sense of security, started noticing the dwindling crowd. At first it was just a whisper, a ripple of unease passing from one guest to another. Where did Lord Beaumont disappear? Wasn't Lady Agatha dancing just moments ago? The missing faces, once lost in the throng, became glaring absences. The vampire, a puppet master pulling invisible strings, watched the growing paranoia with amusement, dancing in his crimson eyes. Each disappearance was a calculated move, a tightening of the noose around his guests' necks. Denials turned to hushed whispers, whispers to frantic searches. The once enchanting masquerade ball transformed into a macabre game of hide-and-seek, where the seekers were the hunted. As the night deepened, shadows seemed to stretch and writhe, twisting into monstrous shapes in the flickering candlelight. The air grew thick with a palpable sense of dread, a suffocating blanket of fear. Whispers, hushed and frantic, replaced the once carefree laughter. Rumors of a hidden chamber, a place where guests were taken and never seen again, circulated like a contagion. Fear, potent and intoxicating, became the true guest of honor. It poisoned every interaction, turned every smile into a grimace. The guests, once eager participants in the vampire's grand illusion, were now trapped in a nightmare of their own making. A blood-curdling scream pierced the air, shattering the fragile facade of normalcy. Panic, like a rabid beast, was unleashed. The grandfather clock in the grand hall chimed 12 times, each resonant gong a death knell to the remaining guests. The music, which had reached a fever pitch of manic energy, abruptly stopped, plunging the room into an eerie silence. The vampire, his eyes blazing with a malevolent light, stepped onto a raised platform, his presence commanding the attention of the terrified guests. His playful demeanor vanished, replaced by a chilling aura of power. "Ladies and gentlemen," he boomed, his voice resonating with an otherworldly power, "I believe it's time we dispense with the pleasantries." A collective gasp swept through the room as the true nature of the night dawned on the remaining guests. The masquerade was over. The hunt was about to begin. Section 4. The Unveiling. With a theatrical flourish, the vampire tore away his mask, revealing his true visage. His features, once so carefully crafted to resemble humanity, contorted into a grotesque mockery of life. His skin, stretched taut over his skull, was as pale as moonlight and cold as ice. His eyes, two burning embers of crimson, blazed with a hunger as old as time. And his fangs, sharp as shards of glass, glinted in the flickering candlelight. A wave of nausea swept through the remaining guests as the true horror of their situation sunk in. They had been lured to this mansion, this den of death, under false pretenses. They were not guests. They were cattle. The screams that erupted were met with the vampire's chilling laughter. He savored their fear, their desperation. It was a feast for his senses, a prelude to the main course. The masquerade of blood had reached its climax, and the guests, their faces a mixture of terror and despair, were about to play their final roles. Section 1. Panic and Flight. The grand hall, once a stage for elegance and charm, descended into chaos. The vampire's true face, a horrifying visage of death, shattered the illusion. Guests, their masks now grotesque parodies of their terrified faces, scrambled for escape. Screams, raw and primal, echoed through the cavernous space. Men and women, their carefully constructed facades crumbling, revealed their true natures. Greed, lust, and ambition were replaced by a single consuming desire: survival. But the mansion, once welcoming, had become a prison. Doors, previously flung open in invitation, now slammed shut, their heavy locks echoing the beating hearts of the trapped guests. The vampire, a predator reveling in the terror he had unleashed, watched the unfolding pandemonium with cold amusement. His eyes, two crimson orbs of malice, tracked the fleeing guests, savoring their every desperate move. Section 2. Trapped like rats. The guests, their initial panic giving way to a chilling realization, scattered like mice before a hungry cat. They surged through the mansion's labyrinthine corridors, their expensive shoes slipping on the polished marble floors now slick with something far more sinister than spilled wine. But every turn led to a dead end. Locked doors, barred windows, secret passages sealed with ancient magic. The mansion, like a living organism, had become their tomb. Whispers of betrayal, of someone knowing the truth all along, slithered through the darkness. Trust, once a fragile bond between them, evaporated, replaced by suspicion and paranoia. The vampire, his presence felt in every gust of cold air, every creak of the floorboards, was playing with his food, herding them towards their inevitable fate. Section 3. The hunt begins. The vampire, no longer content with observing the unfolding chaos, decided to join the game. With a speed that defied his ancient form, he moved through the shadows, a phantom of death stalking his prey. A blood-curdling scream echoed through the mansion as the first guest met their end. The others, their senses heightened by terror, could only imagine the horrors unfolding in the darkness. The scent of fear, intoxicating and addictive, filled the vampire's nostrils. He reveled in the primal terror that gripped his victims, their very life force, a delectable aroma to his heightened senses. The hunt had begun in earnest, and the mansion echoed with the sounds of pursuit and prey. Section 4. Crimson Tears. The guests, now scattered and broken, were easy prey. One by one they fell victim to the vampire's wrath, their cries for mercy swallowed by the cold stone walls. The grand hall, once a stage for merriment, was now a slaughterhouse. The air, heavy with the stench of blood and fear, was thick enough to choke on. The vampire, his thirst only whetted by the carnage, moved with an almost balletic grace, painting the mansion red with the lifeblood of his victims. Each death was a work of art, a macabre masterpiece designed to satisfy his ancient hunger. Section 5. A feast for the senses. The vampire, his face and fangs now slick with blood, stood amidst the carnage, his chest heaving with a mixture of satisfaction and exhilaration. The grand hall, transformed into a charnel house of his own making, was a testament to his power. The scent of blood, metallic and sweet, filled his nostrils, intoxicating him. The silence, broken only by the drip, drip, drip of crimson from his chin, was music to his ears. He had indulged his hunger, had tasted the fear and despair of his victims, and yet, a part of him, a remnant of the being he once was, felt a pang of something akin to regret. But it was a fleeting emotion, quickly extinguished by the overwhelming satisfaction of his primal urges. As dawn approached, casting long shadows across the blood-soaked floors of the mansion, the vampire, his thirst sated, stood alone. The silence, heavy and oppressive, was broken only by the soft sigh of the wind whistling through the broken windows. He glanced around at the carnage, the remnants of his decadent feast. A wry smile touched his lips. Another decade, another masquerade, another cycle of death and indulgence. He was a creature of darkness, forever bound to this cycle of violence and despair. And yet, as he turned to leave the grand hall, a flicker of something akin to loneliness crossed his features. The masquerade was over, but the memory of the blood, the screams, the intoxicating scent of fear would linger long after the last drop of blood had dried. The echoes of screams faded, replaced by a silence heavier than death itself. The grand hall, once vibrant, now stood still, the air thick with the coppery tang of blood. Dawn's light painted streaks onto the carnage. The revelry, the music, the laughter, all gone. Only the evidence of the massacre remained. The mansion had reverted to its true form, a tomb. Even the shadows seemed to cower. The silence was a living presence. It pressed down, heavy and unforgiving. The only sound, a soft, almost imperceptible dripping. A single drop of blood, a final chilling punctuation mark. From the darkest recesses of the mansion, figures emerged. They moved with a practiced efficiency, their faces hidden beneath dark hoods. Shadows, extensions of the mansion, erasing traces of the night's carnage. Bodies wrapped in linen, destined for unmarked graves. By dawn, all traces of the massacre would be gone. Ready to welcome new souls, the mansion remembered. The mansion stood silent, bathed in the afternoon sun. From the outside it appeared unchanged, a timeless monument to a bygone era. But within its walls, a darkness lingered. The portraits seemed to gaze out with knowing eyes. Their smiles were cruel, their eyes glittered with a chilling awareness. They had seen it all before, they would see it again. The grand hall felt empty, devoid of life. The echoes of laughter and screams had been replaced by an oppressive silence. Even the sunlight seemed hesitant to touch the floor. The mansion was more than just bricks and mortar. It was a living entity, a predator in its own right. It fed on the desires, the fears, the very lifeblood of those who dared to cross its threshold, and it would continue to do so decade after decade. Deep within the bowels of the mansion, in a chamber untouched by the cleansing, the vampire slept. He lay upon a bed of velvet and silk, his pale chest rising and falling with each slow, shallow breath. The scent of blood, still clinging to his lips, was a sweet perfume in the stale air. His slumber was not the peaceful repose of the living. It was a hibernation, a necessary respite after a night of unparalleled carnage. He would dream of blood, of screams, of the intoxicating rush of power that came from draining the life force from his victims. But even in sleep, a part of him remained aware. He could sense the passing of time, the slow, inexorable march towards the next decade, the next masquerade, the next feast. And with that awareness came a chilling anticipation. The mansion would be ready, the invitations would be sent. And once again, unsuspecting souls would be lured into his web of death and despair. The cycle would continue. The screen fades to black, leaving the viewer with a lingering sense of unease. The silence is broken only by the sound of a ticking clock, its rhythm slow and deliberate, counting down the seconds to the next blood moon, the next masquerade, the next feast. The story is over for now, but the horror lingers, a chilling reminder that some things never truly die. They simply wait in the shadows, biding their time, waiting for the opportunity to rise again. the masquerade will return, and when it does, the blood will flow once more.